Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third day of Android Study Jam's new to programming track. Today, we'll learn how to get inputs from the user, and we'll create an amazing app where we'll be able to calculate a tip for a particular service. Right? So, welcome. And the prerequisites for today's session is that you should have completed the pathways 1 to 4 of Unit 1 of Android Basics in Kotlin course. And you must have a computer, headphone, internet connection. And the last one is optional Android device and a USB cable. Just in case you don't have them, you can refer to the first day's session where I've told you how you can go for running a virtual device on your system. So today I'll show you how you can go on with the unit 2 pathway 1, and we'll be earning this badge. So this is how our tip calculator app would look like. So without any further ado, let's get started. Now I have the code ready for today's application because today it was in today's session there was a lot of codes to be written in the activity main.xml file, which would unnecessarily take a lot of time, and we know your exams are coming, so it won't be fair from our end to extend today's uh, session unnecessarily. So let's get started. uh, First of all, talking about the UI, we've been arranging the views in our application by the drag and drop method, and you are familiar with this particular screen, right? Now what you have to do in order to code the XML to arrange the views is that you have to press this code button here, and here the XML file will open up. Leave everything over here as it is, right? The properties of the constraint layout, which is the parent layout, is mentioned here, as I have externally mentioned a padding of 16 dp. So all you have to do is type Android and then padding and then the value in dp units, right? So here I have given a layout width, a layout height, and after this we will start writing the XML code for our views. Now as you can see here, I have one view which is edit text, where it's an interactive view where if a user taps on this view, the keyboard would pop up and users will be able to input the values of their choice. Now each view should have an ID. So we have given it a ID, Android ID, and at the rate plus ID slash the ID which you want to give. Right here we have cost of service. We have given it a layout height, a layout width. The width is hard coded here in this case. Next, I have given it a constraint, a vertical and a horizontal one, because as I said earlier, every view should have at least one horizontal and one vertical constraint. So as you can see, I have app, layout, constraint start. The constraint start, now this means the left constraint, right? And the value will be to start off the parent, which is the constraint layout, because the parent widget here is constraint layout, and the top constraint, so this is the vertical one and this was for the horizontal constraint. We have to top of parent, again the constraint layout, and now we have the input type mentioned here, which will be a number, decibel type, and a hint text, so that users can understand what they have to input in that particular view. Here I have written it as cost of service. And remember that the views should be enclosed within the opening angular bracket slash and then the closing angular bracket. Now, if I put this to split section and if I zoom it a bit, let's bring it here. Yeah. And if I make any changes here in this particular edit text view, from our design view, this particular view will be highlighted. So this shows which view are we working on. So it is of a great help. This will help you go on editing the views. Now after the edit text view, I have a text view here. As I said, if I make any changes here, the view will be highlighted in this design section. As you can see, if I do anything here, this view will be highlighted. So now I'm sure that this particular view will be modified. So as I said, we have to give ID to each and every view. So I've given it here a layout width, layout height, and then the text. So here what you have to input is whatever you want the user to see, right? I have written here how was the service, and you can see the text of this text view is how was the service. Moving on, the constraints layout. You can see I have given the left, that is the horizontal, and the top, that is the vertical constraint. As you can see, I have given the horizontal one to start of parent, which will be the left side, the left constraint, layout constraint with the parent, that is the constraint layout, and the topmost constraint, which is the vertical one, to bottom of, and then I have given the ID of the view I want it to be arranged in respect to. Right here we have the cost of service. So this text view will be arranged. The positioning will be arranged in terms of cost of service ID, which is this edit text view. Please note that here we have not given a plus sign because this cost of service ID already exists. So for a pre-existing ID, you don't have to give a plus sign over here. So that was all about the text view. Now, if we have a look at the UI, you can see we have 3 radio buttons, right? And as you can see, if I write anything under this radio group, this particular section is highlighted, which assures me that I'll be modifying this view here, right? So we have 3 radio buttons, and radio buttons have to be wrapped up in a radio group. So I have opened a radio group view here, giving it an ID, tip options, giving it a layout width and a height, the constraint, and as you can see, the top constraint, which is the vertical constraint. So the positioning will be in accordance with the service question ID, which is this text view, and the left constraint will be with respect to the layout constraint. Orientation. Now, this orientation means simply the arrangement of the radio buttons here. Here it's been set to vertical, so it's like this. If it was horizontal, then they have been positioned side by side, right? And this one is here. I'll come to this particular line later once I'm done with the radio buttons. So as of now, let us consider that the coding for radio group is done, and now we have to go and write the XML code for each radio button. So you have to give them an ID, a layout width, a height, and the text. So the option, in simple words, the options which will be available, which the user will be able to see. Yeah, we have amazing 20%. So you can see it's here amazing 20%. So the option, the text which you want the user to see, that you have to mention it in Android text, right? Similarly, I've created a second radio button with the ID option 18% and text good 18%, and another radio button with a different ID and a different text. Now, let's come back to this particular line. By default, what I've done, I have said to the program that the option with the ID option 20% should be checked by default. So you can see amazing 20% has been checked by default. I have not done that, or the user won't do it. It will be checked by default. And then we have the ending of the radio group. Now let us come to the switch button here. What this switch button will do is it will round the tip. If we have our tip in decimal values, then it will make it into a whole number, and this will ultimately be make it easier for the tip pairs to pay a whole number, right, and not a decimal value. So here I have given it ID round up switch, a hard coded layout width of 0 dp, a layout height of wrap content, so it will take as much space as it is required. Checked true, right? So Android checked true, so by default it will be true, right? You can even make it a false, because this checked property holds a boolean value. And then the text which the user should see, round up tip with a question mark. And as I said, the layout constraints, we have here two horizontal and one vertical constraint. End, which means the right constraint, start, which means the left, and top, which says the vertical one. So the left and the right are with respect to the parent constraint layout, but the top one is with tip options ID, which is our radio group. As you can see, tip options have been mentioned as an ID. And now lastly, we have a button. Not lastly, second lastly, we have a button with an ID, a layout width and a layout height, the text which the user should see, then the constraints. So now I think it might be easy for you to understand how you can mention the text, the width, the height, the constraints. Right? It's pretty simple. And then we have a text that's going to display the value of the tip. I'll come to this later once I've finished explaining the logic. So this was all about the views. So together it would sum up to something like this, right? I guess I have it running on my mobile. Yeah, so it would look something like this. Now we have the views ready. Now let's come to the main activity.kt file. And as I said, this file contains the logic of your program, the working of your program, right? So once you open it up, you would see that few lines have been added. So let's come to this particular line first. Yeah, latent var binding activity main binding. Okay, so before this, I just want to say that previously we've been uh, figuring out how to extract a value from a view by using find view by ID. If you don't remember it, head over to the second day's session. So there we've been using find view by ID, right? So I think that's good only if we have handful of IDs, I mean the views, right? But if we have uh, hundreds of views, so it would be a bit confusing for a developer to remember the ID of each and every view. and all the time writing find view by id, and then figuring out the id, I think that would be a uh, it would cost us a lot of labor and time, right? So here what we learn how we can access the values of a view by using binding. So before that, all you have to do is you have to go to Gradle script and head over to this particular Gradle file, build.gradle, and then the project name will be given. Here under the Android tag, you have to add this particular lines. Build features, view binding as true. So this would enable our main activity.kt file to access the views by binding. If you're not understanding exactly what bindings are, just wait for a few more minutes. We'll come to it. So once you have made changes, you will get a notification that your Gradle script has been changed and it needs to be synced. So press the sync now button, and then the Gradle file will be synced. It would save the Gradle file. Now let's come to this line again. I've used the word late int. Now late int, it shows that it's a promise that your code will initialize the variable before using it, right? And if we don't use it, the app would crash. So just let us say that there are few variables which you want to use, and they form the backbone of your application. If somehow later on you don't use any one of them, then your app would crash, giving you a warning that one of your latent variable, one of your backbones have not been initialized. So that is what this late int keyword does, right? Now let's come to this line. Binding equals to activity main binding dot inflate layout inflator. Now this particular line, a binding object is initialized, which will help us to access the views. So altogether, if I sum it up in simple words, a binding object has been created, which will help us to uh, play around with the values of the views, right? And send content view binding dot root. So we are setting the view, the content view, to binding dot root. Binding has already been initialized. Now what does the root means? Root means the this particular keyword means that this content view would be set to the root of the view hierarchy. So the first view that has been initialized in your app, that would be set to content view, right? And then you have to use the word binding and then the calculate button. As you can, if you can remember, the ID was calculate button. So binding dot calculate button, set on click listener, calculate tip. So when we click this particular button, uh, this set on click listener will call this function calculate tip. So once we press that button, a function will be executed, which is calculate tip. That will result. That would give us the resultant tip, right? So that was it about the initialization. Now let's come to the main part, the calculation of the tip. We'll be calculating it with the calculate tip function, and that's why we have the fun keyword here. And let's dive deep into it now. We have initialized a string in text field variable. All you have to do is binding dot, because binding is an object, so you have to use the dot operator. Cost of service dot text. So the cost of service id was this one, the edit text one. So what it would do, it would fetch the text of this particular view and then change it to a string value. Pretty simple. And then we have a variable cost. What it would do, uh, it would change the string in text field. As it was a string, we have converted that particular input to a string, it will change it to double, right? So that's the cost of the service. Next, we have selected ID. So here we'll come to know which of the three radio buttons are checked. So binding, because it's an object, the dot operator, tip options, as the radio group's ID was tip options, and then we are checking the checked radio button ID. In radio buttons, you cannot check more than one options, right? So it will fetch us the ID of the radio button which is checked. So I guess it's pretty simple as of now. And if you're not able to understand the code at any point of time, please let us know in the live chat section. Moving on, we have another tip percentage variable, and then we are using the when operator. So the tip percentage value would depend on the satisfaction of these three conditions. So we are using the when operator, passing in the selected ID, the ID of the checked button, and we'll see if the ID is option 20% or option 18%. And we have three, so it's useless to type in the entire ID of the third option. So we've used the else keyword, right? So if the ID is option 20%, the tip percentage value will be 0.2. If it's option 18%, the ID, then it will be 0.18. Else it would be 0.15, because that's how we have categorized the uh, service, right? Amazing 20%, good 18%, and okay to 15%. So we have stored the tip percentage value by how much percentage we need to multiply the cost of service that we know. So as I said, we need to multiply. So we are uh, calling a variable tip, and the tip percentage is being multiplied to cost, which was the double value that the user has given us as an input. Now we would see if the roundup switch, the switch I was talking about, this one, if this switch is checked, right, it would return us a boolean value. So we'll see if it's checked, we will round up the tip to the upper value. So for that we are using kotlin.math.seal uh, tip. So what we are doing here is, if we are first checking whether the switch button is checked or not, then we are seeing if it is checked. Now if this value is true, then this particular operation will be executed. If not, then this if statement, the body of the if statement, will be skipped. So if it's a true value, we'll change the value of tip to kotlin.math. So we are now accessing the math package of Kotlin, and dot seal. So we'll round up to the upper value, and as a parameter we are passing the value of tip. Now as a tip is a currency, so we need to format it in a particular format of a currency, right? So for that, now we have formatted tip variable. Then we are going for number format. Using the dot operator, we are going for get currency instance. So we'll see what instance is this currency, and then finally we will format the tip. So I hope it was clear till now. We are almost done with the coding of our app, but we also need to show, right, the value of the tip. So for that, I have written this text view in the end that has a ID tip result, a particular width and height, the tip amount, and then this dollar s sign here. The currency, the formatted currency will be here, and then the once again, I guess I changed it. Yeah, make it to dollar s. Oh, it's already been changed in the strings.xml file, because here I've added a value tip amount that's going to hold this particular value. So the name is tip amount, and as you can see, we have a dollar s here. Now we've left this dollar s for the formatting of the tip amount. So if the dollar sign would come here, sorry, not the dollar, it's the percentage sign. So this percentage sign, what it will do, it will replace this entire thing with the dollar sign, as we have formatted the result of the tip in a currency format, and then binding dot tip result, because the id of this text view is tip result. We are adding the text over here, so the text of that view will be tip amount and then the formatted tip, right? And then you can see I have layout constraint here and here. This is the left one and this is the top one, so horizontal and then the vertical one. And then I have another thing, tools text tip amount $10. So this is for you. The tools text is for developers, just to know what a value will be visible. Now this particular parameter is not visible to the user, it's only for the developer. So that was it. It's a pretty basic app, but I guess it's beautifully constructed, because it gives you an idea of the basics of getting the user input from uh, your application. Now if you run this app, I have it running on my cell phone. So let's say the cost of service, I put it to 100. I find it amazing, and the round up tip button is checked, and if I press on calculate, so you see $20 is being displayed. If I change it to 18 and then put on calculate 18, if I change it to okay 15%, it changes to 15. Now let us see if the round up tip button works. I'll change this to, let's say, 101. Amazing. And I do not wish to round up the tip and then calculate. You see we are getting 20.20 and 18.18, 15.15. Let's see if it works. If I put it to good and then I wish to round up the tip, yeah, it changes to 19. It was 18.18 and now it has been changed to 19. So it works perfectly, right? So this was the app. It was a basic app, but I think it might have helped you a lot to get your facts clear about how you can get or how you can access value which has been inputted by a user. So that was the end of today's session. Let me just know if you have any questions as of now. And don't worry, we won't extend today's session a lot. I know from the next week you have your exams coming up. So I won't wait long for the questions. So if you have any questions, then please reach out to me on Discord. I see after the second day's session, a lot of people have been asking questions, and that's great. So if you face any difficulties, uh, just reach out to me on Discord or on Twitter. And there's a small announcement. As we said that you need to complete all the code labs of prior to programming experience track before 25th, and 25th is just a week later. So soon we'll be rolling out a form where you will have to give us your name, email ID, and you have to submit us the screenshot of your developer's profile uh, dashboard where all the badges are visible, right? So let's say if it does not fit in one screenshot, you can go and submit us two screenshots. Just make sure all the badges are visible on the screenshots. And if you have any project created and it's anything other than the apps that are included in the curriculum of Android Study Jams, you can submit me the link of your application. You can upload it on Google Play Store and give me the link, or you can upload it in your drive and then give us the shareable link. We'll forward it to the official Google team, and if they like it, they're going to showcase your app on almost all of their major social networking sites. So I don't think you should let this opportunity go. And lastly, Solutions Challenge 2021 is uh, knocking at the door. So go for it. Make an application that's going to benefit the society. And I wish you a happy learning. And this was the end of Android Study Jams at our campus. But we are always open to questions and queries. So just in case you have any, feel free to reach out to me or anyone in our team. The links of the slides will be available soon. And that's it from today. Hope you like this session and wish you a happy learning again. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any queries. Okay. That's it from our end. Thank you so much for joining in today.